There is a pattern in history that does not miss. It does not hesitate. It does not spare the powerful simply because they believe they are exceptional. This pattern has already erased 3 global superpowers in the last 5 centuries swiftly, brutally, with mathematical precision. And in 2025, the United States is walking that same road, matching decisions, pressures, and delusions with uncanny accuracy. In 1590, Spain possessed more wealth than any empire before it. Gold and silver poured from the Americas in torrents. Their armies dominated continents. Their currency anchored global trade. 80 years later, the empire was bankrupt, broken, not by enemies, but by a system rotting from within. In 1914, Britain stood astride the world. The pound sterling ruled international finance. Its navy ruled the seas, and its colonies spanned the planet. 40 years later, the currency had collapsed. The empire had dissolved, and Britain became a junior partner to the very nation it once outshone. And in 1991, the Soviet Union, armed with nuclear arsenals, global influence, and ideological certainty, disappeared in less than 900 days. No invasion, no dramatic final battle, only internal economic implosion and the silent withdrawal of power. 3 empires, 3 collapses, 3 identical sequences. And here is the part no one wants to confront. The United States has already completed 5 of the 7 stages. Not approaching them, not flirting with them, inside them. The pattern does not care about optimism, patriotism, or exceptionalism. It only cares about mathematics, leverage, debt overreach, and the structural limits of imperial power. And the pattern has already begun. Every empire believes it is different. Every empire believes it has one more decade, one more advantage, one more miracle left in reserve. And every empire is wrong in exactly the same way. Imperial collapse is never a thunderclap. It is a slow, internal erosion masked by momentum, confidence, and tradition. The flags still fly. The currency still circulates. The armies still march. But beneath the surface, the arithmetic begins to shift quietly at first, then violently. Collapse begins not with defeat, but with denial. The core thesis is simple, brutal, and historically absolute. When an empire outgrows its economic engine, overextends its obligations, and convinces itself that its currency, its military, and its dominance are immutable, the collapse becomes a mathematical certainty. Spain thought its silver was infinite. Britain believed its empire was self-correcting. The Soviet Union trusted its ideology more than its balance sheets. The United States believes its dollar is untouchable. The mechanism does not change. The pressure points do not evolve. Only the timeline accelerates. Empires fall because they make the same strategic mistake. They convert temporary advantage into permanent entitlement. They assume global demand for their currency will last forever. They assume allies will never hedge. They assume debt can expand indefinitely. They assume decline will give warnings before it arrives. But economic systems do not send warnings. They crack in silence and collapse in noise. There are 3 forces that determine the fate of every global superpower: productive strength, the real capacity to create value; monetary trust, the world's belief that your currency is worth holding; strategic discipline, the ability to limit commitments to what the economy can sustain. Lose any one of these and power weakens. Lose all 3 and the collapse becomes irreversible. Spain lost productive strength when silver replaced industry. Britain lost monetary trust when the pound broke from gold. The USSR lost strategic discipline when it matched the U.S. militarily with a fraction of the economic base. The United States in 2025 is losing all 3 simultaneously. Productive strength has been hollowed out by decades of offshoring. Monetary trust erodes with every trillion printed. Strategic discipline dissolves as obligations multiply across continents. This is not prophecy. This is precedent. This is not speculation. This is repetition. The sequence is not theoretical. It has already played out 3 times in 3 different eras across 3 different political and ideological systems. And now it is accelerating again. History proves it again and again. Every empire begins its decline long before anyone can see it. The collapse is mechanical, almost clinical, a sequence of pressures accumulating beneath the surface until the structure can no longer bear its own weight. And the first stage is always the same. Stage 1, military overextension. It begins with ambition disguised as security. Spain spread its armies across Europe, the Mediterranean, the Americas, and Asia, fighting 5 wars simultaneously by 1580. Britain stationed troops on 6 continents defending trade routes that stretched beyond any sustainable horizon. The Soviet Union poured 15-20% of its GDP into military competition, crushing its own economy under the weight of tanks, missiles, and proxy wars. Each believed global presence equaled global permanence. Each discovered that global presence is the most expensive illusion in history. Military overextension is not about strength. It is about arithmetic. The cost curves bend upward. Revenues flatten. The gap widens until the empire must choose between retreat or insolvency. Empires never choose retreat, and by the time they consider it, the second stage has already begun. Stage 2, currency debasement. When obligations exceed income, empires turn to the only lever they control: the value of their own money. Spain diluted silver with copper until their coins became a mockery of their own emblem. Britain defended an overvalued pound until markets broke it. The Soviet Union printed rubles no one wanted while paying for imports with gold because its own currency was meaningless. Debasement is the silent admission of decline. It is the moment an empire chooses appearance over stability, illusion over discipline. Picture this: warehouses full of currency no one trusts, gold reserves, dwindling allies demanding payment in harder assets. The empire keeps issuing promises, but the world stops believing them. The money looks the same, yet inside it is hollow metal. This is the turning point. This is where confidence begins to evaporate. This is where the timeline accelerates, but the pattern had already begun. Once an empire crosses the threshold of currency manipulation, the decline no longer proceeds slowly. The system begins to feed on itself, pulling the empire downward in compounding spirals. Stage 3, the debt spiral. Debt is not the problem. The inability to stop borrowing is. Spain defaulted 4 times in 1 century. Britain borrowed its empire into exhaustion through 2 world wars. The Soviet Union quietly cannibalized its reserves, oil, gold, industrial stock, only to fall into a hole it could no longer climb out of. A debt spiral forms when yesterday's borrowing requires today's borrowing to sustain it. Interest becomes the true enemy. The present becomes hostage to the past. Empires do not collapse when they run out of money. They collapse when they run out of trust. And after trust fades, the real destruction begins. Stage 4, loss of productive capacity. Imperial confidence blinds nations to the decay of their own foundations. Spain believed silver made productivity unnecessary. Britain believed global trade guaranteed industrial supremacy. The USSR believed ideology could outperform markets. They were all wrong. Production slows, innovation fades, imports rise, domestic output falls, factories rust, skilled labor leaves. The empire becomes a consumer, not a creator. Picture this: empty shipyards, silent factories, imported goods flooding markets that once exported to the world. Wealth flows out faster than it flows in. The empire becomes dependent on the very systems it once dominated. This is the moment when decline becomes visible. This is where citizens feel the shift. This is where faith begins to crack. And with the economic base weakened, the final internal fracture appears. Stage 5, social decay. When an empire's economy no longer produces and its currency no longer anchors trust, society begins to unravel. Spain's cities filled with beggars as the wealthy refused to work. Britain watched living standards fall and political unity fracture. The Soviet Union dissolved under the weight of cynicism, corruption, and hopelessness. Social decay is not chaos in the streets, though it can become that. It is the quiet disintegration of cohesion, purpose, and shared belief. Crime rises, institutions lose legitimacy, birth rates fall, emigration rises, cynicism replaces confidence, polarization replaces unity. By the time the population feels the decline, the structural damage is already irreversible. By the time they realized it was too late. Stage 6 and 7 are where empires die not gradually but suddenly, not peacefully but dramatically. Stage 6, loss of reserve currency status. This is the moment of truth. An empire can survive debt. It can survive political division. It can even survive military defeat, but it cannot survive losing the world's trust in its money. Spain's silver lost credibility when debasement became undeniable. Britain's pound lost its crown when it broke from gold, and America rose as creditor. The USSR never held reserve currency status to lose, but its collapse shows what happens when a currency carries no external trust at all. When reserve status fades, trade shifts away, allies hedge, and capital flees. The empire's greatest advantage becomes its greatest vulnerability. Its own money returns home in a flood it cannot control. The collapse is no longer avoidable. Stage 7. Sudden implosion. Empires do not die gently. They do not fade gracefully. They break. In Spain, collapse unfolded over decades, but the economic heart stopped almost instantly when silver production fell. In Britain, the empire evaporated in barely 20 years after World War II. In the Soviet Union, everything ended in 900 days: economy, territory, government, currency. Collapse is nonlinear. It is a chain reaction. Currency crisis, debt crisis, political crisis, systemic failure. Picture this: markets freezing overnight, the currency plunging, allies distancing, institutions paralyzed, the military unfunded, and the global order reshaping itself without waiting for permission. This is the final stage. This is the point of no return. This is where every empire realizes the same truth. History doesn't repeat, it evolves. And the next stage has started. When we look at Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union, it is easy to believe their collapses were products of their unique failures. Misguided kings, disastrous wars, flawed ideology. But the truth is sharper, colder, and far more uncomfortable. Their collapse was not personal. It was structural, and the same structure now surrounds us. In 2025, the United States stands exactly where those empires once stood, believing its dominance is permanent, while every underlying metric tells another story. You can see stage 1 every time you look at a map of American military presence: troops in 150 countries, bases in 80, obligations across Europe, the Middle East, East Asia, the Pacific. A global deployment pattern no empire in history has sustained without eventual collapse. Even Rome never attempted this scale. You can see stage 2 in the money supply. Trillions created in months. A currency unanchored to anything but trust, and trust is a finite resource. Debasement no longer looks like copper mixed into silver. It looks like unlimited liquidity created electronically dissolving value, one basis point at a time. You can see stage 3 in the national debt clock spinning faster than the economy can grow. Interest payments nearing $1 trillion a year. Borrowing to service previous borrowing. Running deficits in peacetime that rival wartime levels. This is not mismanagement. This is the textbook definition of a debt spiral. This is not an isolated moment. This is not a temporary imbalance. This is the same architecture of decline that destroyed every superpower before us, and we still call it normal If you want to see where the United States is in the sequence, do not look at Washington. Look at the world around it. You can see stage 4 in the hollowing of American production. Supply chains moved overseas, manufacturing gutted, essential military components sourced from geopolitical rivals. The same pattern Spain followed when silver replaced industry consumption up, creation down. The same pattern that left Britain dependent on imports by the 1970s. The same pattern that forced the Soviet Union to buy grain from its enemies. You can see stage 5 in the fractures of American society, trust at historic lows, cities struggling with homelessness and crime, political factions that speak past each other rather than to each other, a public fatigued, cynical, and divided exactly what Spain, Britain, and the USSR faced as they entered terminal decline, and the early tremors of stage 6 are already here. BRICS nations exploring new currency systems, Saudi Arabia accepting yuan for oil after nearly 50 years of dollar loyalty, central banks buying gold at the fastest rate in modern history, China and Russia settling trade outside the dollar, allies hedging, adversaries accelerating, markets adjusting. This is what the early loss of reserve currency status looks like. Not a dramatic event, but a slow, quiet migration away from the center of gravity. And once stage 6 begins, stage 7 follows swiftly. It is not a matter of belief. It is a matter of sequence. And now we are walking the same road they once did. Every empire believes it will be the exception. Every empire thinks it will find the one escape route history has denied to all others. But the pattern does not negotiate. It does not bend. It does not pause because a nation feels deserving of more time. It simply follows its sequence to the end. Spain learned this when its silver ran dry. Britain learned this when the pound broke. The Soviet Union learned this when its reserves evaporated. And the United States is approaching the same convergence of pressures, debt, distrust, division, and dependency at a speed no previous empire has ever reached. Collapse is rarely announced. It arrives quietly then all at once, first as a currency crisis, then as a credit crisis, then as a political crisis, then as a transformation of the world order overnight. It is not the fall that destroys an empire. It is the moment it realizes the world has already moved on. Maybe America will reverse course. Maybe the institutions will adapt. The currency will stabilize. The society will rebuild. Maybe this time will truly be different. But history, cold, unblinking, and undefeated, suggests otherwise, because in the end, empires do not collapse from external attack. They collapse the moment their foundations can no longer support the weight of their illusions, and that moment is closer than most are willing to admit. Empires never fall slowly. They fall suddenly after decades of insisting they never would.